Hey, welcome everybody. I'm releasing this video on Stephen Bassett because Steve, as I was getting ready to do a podcast interview of him, it turns out, as I thought about it, Steve has really been a huge influence in my life, more than I would have ever expected until I sat down and I really looked at it. And in particular, the reality is Stinky McDougal, Dr. Stinky McDougal, wouldn't exist today in large part without the encouragement of Stephen Bassett. So how does this happen? I first came across Steve in 2013 while I was writing a book, as I was writing in my journals and journaling. And I remember the date, it was April 29th, 2013. Yeah. I was sitting in my office doing research and writing as I was in that phase at the time. What I was doing was recording and writing my thoughts on anything that I read in the news and I thought might be relevant to an economic collapse. And so I've got 13 or 14 of these or 15 of these left. 13? The last two are missing. It's a story. In any case, I'm sitting in my den, or my office rather. It's April 29th, 2013. And one of the UFO channels that I follow, Third Phase of Moon, was doing an interview of Steve Bassett. And Steve was doing the interview because he was putting on what is called the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And he was on there to invite people to watch the Citizen Hearing live as it was broadcast from the National Press Club, which I did. I turned on the Citizen Hearing and I watched, I believe, the vast majority of the Citizen Hearing live as it happened. And then on top of that, I watched, large portions of it another 2 or 3 times at minimum. And it was just an utterly transformative experience. And the day stands out not just because, the Citizen Hearing began, but partway through, about 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning, as I'm sitting in my office, I hear a helicopter outside. Not just like a Black Hawk or a chopper of any kind you might find, but like a really odd sounding double helicopter. And in fact, it was a Chinook. And it flew over the neighborhood of Hudson that I lived in. And it looked, I think, on its path, it was headed for New Richmond. And since that day, April 29th, it was a Monday, 2013, we've had helicopters flying over the Twin Cities. And the Citizens Hearing was being held in Washington, D.C. on that very day. Oddly enough, a few months ago, someone brought up the fact that helicopters started flying around our heads. He says, I don't know, about 10 years ago. I said, yeah, 10 years, just exactly, in fact, they started flying over. I know because that was the first day of the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure. And so I plugged into the Citizens Hearing on Disclosure that day. I'm trying to see if I wrote on it in the morning specifically. Yeah, here we go. I'm going to put this in there, but I'll get it up there. Here's a picture I took of the helicopter, and it's hard to see. I'll fold it. I'll put another paper out. I'll put this in. And this is actually not 2 helicopters. The object in the lower part of the screen is a wasp that was flying next to my house. And the upper one on the right is the Chinook helicopter that flew over my house on the day that the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure began in Washington, D.C. Interestingly, the Citizen Hearing was planned and paid for primarily by a donation of silver. And at that time, I didn't know it, but that silver story, which I don't have to cover, maybe we can talk about it tomorrow, but on the interview, but that silver story was my story too. Its price collapse from 28 down to eventually, $14 an ounce, devastated me financially. And was part of my growth and part of my experience. I accept it. It's not the end of the world. But from the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure, where I was exposed to Joe Buchman, our guest on a previous podcast, I began, exploring the issue more deeply after I ran for office. And so for those that don't know, Part of my history is that in 2014, I was the Libertarian candidate for governor in the state of Wisconsin. I ran a donationless campaign. I got less than 3/4% of vote, just about 3/4% of vote, of 1%. And I was a pro-legalization candidate. And the weekend before the election itself, a third-party organization began running ads on my behalf. And those ads were called the Get Burke, Get Blazed ads. And the first one of which is my video, or their video rather, the Mount Rushmore of weed.
So, who do you think is on the Mount Rushmore of weed?
Definitely Snoop Dogg. Bob Marley?
Willie Nelson.
And Robert Burke, after he legalizes marijuana in Wisconsin.
Vote Robert Burke for governor. Get Burke. Get blazed. Mount Rushmore? More like Mount Cushmore.
And so I had run for office. We had these ads which drew great attention to the Libertarian Party. And so, having had a chance to chat with Steve, he actually took a call from me. I decided that spring that when Steve began doing the Whitehouse.gov press conference, or excuse me, Whitehouse.gov petition, right? So you just put the petition on the White House website, and if you can get 10,000 people to sign on, the White House said they would respond. And I went, I mean, how hard can 10,000 be if you just, maybe you get lucky? And so I started putting the posts out that people should, on my old Burke for Governor Facebook page, I put out the links and asked people who had, come onto my Facebook page for governor. I asked them if, they'd signed the petition for me. And it caused such a problem for the party that my campaign manager, who had control of the website page, deleted my Burke for Governor website page, and we lost connection with about 1,500 people on that Facebook page. And so, touching the third rail of the extraterrestrial phenomenon, even in something so simple as a petition for people to just go on and sign, it caused deep levels of consternation in the party. And so that was sort of the beginning of the pushback for me saying anything. And so I was actually doing interviews. I did a couple of interviews where I talked about the issue. I've grown a lot from those. You go back and you listen, and you discover all sorts of interesting things. And so it's one of those things where I continued to chat with Steve. In fact, later in 2015, Hillary Clinton had decided to run for president, and she had gone in front of a media organization somewhere. I think it was out in New Hampshire. No, it was, anyway, East Coast. And she'd been asked, hey, will you still release the UFO files? And Hillary said, yeah, right? And so Steve and I chatted about one night about whether I would ever vote for Hillary purely to get the UFO files released. One, I don't really believe Hillary would probably have done the full justice of it. Who knows for sure. But secondly, I don't believe in voting anymore, so it really was a moot point today. But back then I was clear that even if I did vote, it wouldn't be for Hillary Clinton, and certainly not just for the UFO files. But engaging in that question, I realized that although I didn't have to endorse her for president, I could send out a press release to the state of Wisconsin letting them know that I endorsed her call for release of the UFO files. And I did that from my Wisconsin Libertarian Party email address, and it got picked up on a press release aggregator. And when one of the individuals in the party saw it, he went apoplectic, and things just went from bad to worse. And so involvement in the UAP question, it is a very volatile thing to talk about. And so Joe's experience when he ran is not altogether unlike mine. And we've subjected ourselves to this because we've trusted Steve Bassett as a voice for getting disclosure of this issue out. And if you haven't followed my work before, you know that one of my key beliefs is, sort of in the Goebbels sense, which is to say, look, they've told a lie, and they've repeated it over and over and over again. And people have bought it. But that lie now becomes the mortal enemy of the state. And so to acknowledge it is to acknowledge how absolutely powerless our democracy really was. There would be really good things about that, and some very startling things about that as well. So Steve has had a huge impact, and the reason he gets credit for the Stinky McDougal name was that I was such a pariah in the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin that I was being removed from committees that I was on. And then on top of that, I had actually been asked to be the state coordinator for the Gary Johnson campaign. I had agreed to do it. I had actually gotten started. And then someone within the Wisconsin Party, the same individual, told them that I wasn't trustworthy. And they pulled me from the volunteer coordinator for Gary Johnson in the state of Wisconsin, which meant ultimately none of the libertarians in the state got to work for Gary Johnson in that role, and we didn't get the database of volunteers in the state of Wisconsin for Gary Johnson, which would have been fantastic. You can see where ego, right? People over and over and over believing that they know what the right thing is to say, that they know what the right political issues that we should talk about are. People who think they can censor the messages that are coming through is one of the lessons that the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin and libertarians in general have to learn. In fact, it's really incredible how much censorship just in our culture that we're dealing with today. And Steve's push since 1996 has been to end the censorship, the truth embargo of the UFO phenomenon. And it's one that I engaged in because he presented me with this incredible 5-day experience where over 40 witnesses gave over 30 hours of testimony to 6 former members of Congress because Congress refused to hold the hearing. Where we are today in Congress actually holding a hearing is only possible because of the work that Steve Bassett has done, and because of the work that Tom DeLonge has done, and because of the work that Stephen Greer perhaps has done. It is this ongoing push for an authentic relationship in our entire civilization that we all strive. And those brave enough, right, as we learned from the Ash conformity experiment, those brave enough to tell the truth when it becomes self-evident to them, those people are truly the ones who are free. And when we turn this corner, right, one of the things that we're going to discover is just how important it is to be free, and how important it is that people like Steve fought for our freedom in learning about this phenomenon. And so I do wish everybody a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and don't miss the Steve Bassett podcast interview coming up shortly. Peace out, everyone.